Welcome back, everyone. Last week's episode of The Penguin saw Sofia doing away with her father's surname and declaring herself a Gigante, which was her mother's maiden name. She also finally killed Johnny Whitty in cold blood. Now, as she built her own criminal empire, Sofia has allied with her father's old rival, Salvatore Maroni, who now has even more reasons for wanting to kill Osco. It's been rough recently for our favorite waddling mobster. He was able to get back his supply of Bliss. Now, episode 5 ended with him and Vic finding their new base of operation. But they are far from the top of the Gotham's food chain. After burning Nadia and Touch Maroni alive, Oz is now in hiding in a dilapidated apartment in Crown Point, alongside his mother Frances and Vic. Episode 6 Gold Rush picks up several weeks later as Oz and Vic attempt to find a way to unleash Bliss onto the streets of Gotham, while Sofia and Sal conspire to take down the Penguin. Winter has arrived and it is beginning to snow in Gotham. Oz narrates, giving us a quick recap about Sofia shedding the Falcon name and Sal's escape from Blackgate before questioning who's got the power. It's then revealed that Oz and Vicky's new base of operation in the abandoned trolley station is thriving. After initially being left with only 2 salvageable buckets of Bliss, the business is now thriving and they are selling the drug themselves. Oz tells his workers that every single gang in Gotham will be looking for a way to get their hands on Bliss, and with his steady cash flow, he will be able to get his life back on the track. Vic drives into headquarters on a motorcycle and meets up with Oz in his office, handing him a duffel bag full of money. Oz confirms that they only need to get a few more Gotham's gangs on board before they are fully established in the city. However, there is a lot of bad blood between all these gangs, which is typical. So Oz tells Vic that they have to make sure that their business isn't being advertised. The biggest get though is the fact that Zhao, the head of the Triad family, who you may recall from episode 3, is now interested, and with his partnership they can take their business international. The only true downside is that station's power is still unreliable, and City has been rationing the power, rerouting nearly all of it to rich neighborhood. Even more worrisome, Sofia and Sal's guys are attempting to sniff out their whereabouts. Oz doesn't seem too worried, explaining the fact that they are willing to pay those who work with them gives them an upper hand over their enemies. At the Gigante estate, Sofia and Dr. Julian Rush have taken their relationship to a frisky new level, but she doesn't seem too interested in him helping her with taking out Oz. After telling Julian he can see himself out, Sofia goes to the kitchen where he finds Sal cooking one of his wife's old family recipes. Sal stresses that Oz has the upper hand on them in supplying Bliss, and that neighborhood gangs will buy from whoever is selling, including the Triad. Unfazed, Sofia states that they need to let every gang know that dealing with Oz comes at a cost. Back in Crown Point, Vic prepares breakfast as Oz tells Frances that they will be out of their safe house in no time. Frances begins to have a manic episode, threatening Oz that if he can restore the heating, she will go to the Rex Calabres, who has been dead for years. Amid the morning chaos, Oz receives a phone call informing that the Triads are out of the deal. Bewildered, he orders Vic to turn on the news, which reports that 3 bodies have been found hanging on the street, each with a severed finger. Oz quickly deduces that Sofia is behind this, but his frustration quickly subsides when he comes up with a new scheme. They will give away Bliss for free, which will let the gangs know that whether they like it or not, the drugs is already in their neighborhood. As Vic walks through the Crown Point neighborhood, he is approached by Squid, a local drug dealer he crossed paths with while his family was still alive. Squid inquires about how Vic has come into more money, pointing out his brand new shoes and asking to get in on the operation. Vic is unsure that becomes further intimidated when Squid reveals that he saw him and Frances walking into their safe house and threatens to find the older woman unless Vic lets him in on things. Meanwhile, Sal and Sofia has broken into Oz's old apartment in the Diamond District. When Sass inquired about the framed childhood photo of Oz and his brothers, pointing out that they could target someone their enemies cares about, Sofia tells him that Oz's family is already dead, as Sal proceeds to smash up Oz's apartment using a silver golf club. Sofia discovers Eve Carlos' underwear in drawer alongside a Polaroid photo. Of course, we already know that Frances isn't dead, but she is close to it at this point. Back at the safe house, Oz hears his mother calling for help from the bathroom and finds her bruised and shivering in the tub. Realizing that she was lying in freezing cold water all through the night, Frances breaks down in a moment of lucidity and tells Oz that she doesn't want to be alive anymore, as her dementia has only worsened. She then makes Oz promise to kill her if her mind ends up going before her body does. The two share a tender moment where Oz dresses Frances up in a nice dress and puts on her makeup, telling her that she looks like Rita Hayworth from her favorite movie, Gilda. This scene is the perfect example of how the Penguin can make you sympathize with its dastardly character, unlike something like Todd Phillips' Joker, where you only feel pity for Arthur Fleck, or Venom, which turns the supervillain into a wisecracking anti-hero. You still feel for Oz and Frances, despite all of their past sins. While their relationship is complicated, they truly do have a love for one another. And contrary to what Sofia says, it proves that Oz still has a heart. O'Connell is also phenomenal in these moments. There are times when an actor plays someone with Alzheimer's or dementia that it can lean way too over the top or feel played for laughs. But O'Connell plays it so naturally, in a manner that becomes heartbreaking. When Vic arrives back at the apartment and finds Oz working on the generator, he confronts their success in dropping Bliss all over the streets of Gotham. But he is concerned about Squid. However, Oz is too preoccupied with fixing generator and worrying about his mothers to have a deeper conversation. Meanwhile, Sofia patrols the streets asking around about Eve and is stopped by Roxy, who tells Sofia that she will lead her to Eve for the right price. Later, Oz pulls up to the city hall, waiting until Counsel Hardy is alone before confronting him directly. Hardy, who recognizes Oz from his previous association with the Carmine Falcon, insists that he has already paid off his debt. Oz replies by grabbing Hardy's nostrils with a pair of pliers, demanding that the councilman bring power back to Crown Point and threatening to blackmail him if he doesn't comply. Hardy finally gives in, but Oz gives him until sunup to get the job done. While getting into his car, Oz receives a call from a member of the Sullivan crime family, and based on the tenor of things, they are not thrilled about Bliss ending up in their territory, which gives Oz in to set up a meeting. Meanwhile, Vix meets up with Squid and attempts to pay him off, but the drug dealer refuses the money, throwing it back at him and demanding a meeting with Oz. When Vic walks, Squid threatens to snitch on Oz to the Gigante family for a bigger payout. Terrified, Vic agrees, only to pull out his gun and shoot Squid in the neck, where his defenses are down. Horrified by what he's done, Vic runs away from the scene as Squid bleeds to death. Finding Eve's drawer and photo at Oz's old place, Sofia Gigante eventually finds Eve herself. To her credit, Eve knew the former Falcon would be looking for her eventually and had one of her girls send Sofia up so they could meet. As Sofia listens to Eve talk about her relationship with Oz, it initially seems like Sofia is going to kill her, especially considering Eve was Oz's alibi on the night he killed Sofia's brother Alberto. However, Sofia decided to let Eve live, who had essentially intended to offer herself up so that Sofia wouldn't go after the girls in her employ, fearing Sofia's false reputation as a hangman. Furthermore, Eve does end up telling Sofia that Oz is based in Crown Point, telling her that she deserves her shot at Penguin, although she and Oz do have a relationship that seemingly goes beyond the financial and physical. It's still fairly complex and is hardly genuine love. Likewise, Eve didn't know about what Oz did, having been responsible for Sofia's 10 years in Arkham. To that end, Eve chose to give up Oz not only to take the heat off herself and her girls, but also because there's a part of her that's empathetic to Sofia and what happened to her. However, that doesn't mean she wants it known that the information about the Oz whereabouts came from her. As such, it's not going to be good if Oz ever finds out that Eve gave him up in the final 2 episodes of The Penguin that are still to come. Rick tearfully tells Oz that he killed Squid and expresses remorse. In response, Oz hugs him and tells him that it gets easier. While continuing to comfort him, Vic returns to the apartment while Oz meets up with the local gang leaders of the Gotham for what he calls his Gold Summit. Refused to back down even after the Gigantes and Maronis started targeting the gangs who agreed to work with him, Oz sets up a meeting with all the smaller gangs in Gotham City. This includes classic groups from the original comics including the Odessa Mob, the Sullivans, the Lob Boys, the Burnley Town Massive, and the Triads, who can take Penguin's drug business international, promising them all a piece of it if they can work together. Penguin gets all of these gangs to unite to gain greater control over the Gotham itself than they ever have before. The key that makes Penguin's proposal work is identifying Sofia and Sal as the common enemy of all the other gangs, referring to them as the old guard who couldn't care less about the smaller time organization. Penguin strikes at the heart of the long-held disparity between Gotham's biggest families and the other gangs who have only ever received the leftovers. This is why Penguin succeeds despite being so untrustworthy, while he is not a hustler who will do whatever it takes to get what he wants. He also knows how to present himself as someone with a core that's worth listening to. The episode concludes back in Crown Point as the electricity suddenly comes back on. Francis and Vic celebrate by dancing to a playing record, but unbeknownst to either of them, Sofia has found her way into apartment, clutching a crowbar. As established earlier in Penguin, Sofia believed that Oz's mother was dead, a lie told long ago by Penguin to keep Francis safe. As such, it's why Sofia tells Sal earlier in the Penguin episode 6 that Penguin's greatest strength was that he didn't have anyone or anything to be used against him. However, that's clearly all changed now that Sofia has found both Francis and Victor in Crown Point. No doubt wanting to make Oz suffer. It stands for the reason Sofia will definitely be taking Francis hostage. However, Victor's fate feels far less certain by the end of the Penguin episode 6. While the latest episode of The Penguin may not reach those impressive heights of the previous two, it's still another strong addition to the series. Episode 6 doesn't boast as many big revelations and is more predictable in terms of the plot. But much like episode 5, the pacing is extremely tight and the runtime flies by. The biggest highlight without questions is Frances' story arc, despite us still not fully knowing where her character's moral truly lie. It's hard to see her suffer. Gold Rush also doubles down on Oz's softer side to the point where by the time the Batman Part 2 comes along, we may be looking at the characters much differently. Maybe we might even be rooting for him in some ways. Sure, the whole Eat the Rich storyline has been done to death in recent years, but it's always had a strong ties to the mythology of Batman. We have become accustomed to his stories in Gotham, where Bruce Wayne sulks around his mansion. By comparison, the Penguin is successfully able to paint a portrait not just of one of the Caped Crusaders' biggest foes, but also of those underrepresented groups. We have always known Gotham is a city of in shambles, but the Penguin succeeds in showing us why it is the way that it is.